November 29, 1943. South China Sea. Just after midnight. The sea is black. No moon. No horizon. Only the dull throb of diesel engines echoing across the water. A Japanese merchant convoy crawls through the darkness. 12 cargo ships, heavy with oil, rubber, and steel from the Dutch East Indies. Destroyer escorts cut narrow wakes beside them. Their captains believe the ocean around them is empty. They are wrong. 16 miles away, something moves beneath the surface. Inside the cramped steel hull of the American submarine USS Bowfin, Commander Joe Enright studies a glowing sonar screen. The boat rocks gently as it slips through the dark Pacific. A sonar operator whispers, "Multiple screws, bearing 085. The room goes quiet. Enright steps closer. The faint rhythmic pulses on the sonar aren't warships. They're cargo ships. And there are many of them. Through the periscope, the submarine slowly rises. Cold seawater slides down the lens as the scope breaks the surface. Enright turns the handles. Shapes emerge from the darkness. First one ship, then another, then a whole convoy. Cargo vessels, tankers, escorts. An entire supply artery moving through the sea like a floating city. Enright exhales slowly. "Gentlemen, we just found the war. Torpedo men, move quickly now." Heavy mark. 14 torpedoes slide into their tubes with metallic thuds. Outside, the convoy continues forward, unaware that death is stalking beneath the waves. Inside Bowfin, Enright watches through the periscope again. Cargo ships, tankers, everything Japan needs to keep fighting. Oil from Borneo, rubber from Malaya, food from Southeast Asia. Without these ships, Japan cannot fight. Without these ships, Japan cannot survive. Range 1,800 yards, the fire control officer says quietly. Enright waits. The convoy turns slightly, presenting perfect targets. The submarine glides silently into position. Open outer doors. A hydraulic hiss echoes through the hull. The torpedo tubes are ready. Enright looks through the periscope one last time. The nearest tanker fills the lens. Huge, slow, defenseless. Fire 1. The submarine jolts gently. A torpedo rockets into the black water. Fire 2, Fire 3, Fire 4. For steel predators race through the ocean toward the convoy. 30 seconds pass. 40. Then, a massive explosion shatters the night. The tanker erupts in flame. Oil ignites instantly, sending a tower of fire hundreds of feet into the air. Japanese sailors scream as burning fuel spreads across the water. Another explosion. Then another. Cargo ships tear open like tin cans. Steel plates peel apart. Cargo spills into the sea. The convoy dissolves into chaos. Destroyers roar forward, searchlights cutting through the smoke. Depth charges plunge into the water. But the submarine is already diving. Inside Bowfin, red lights glow as the crew descends into darkness. Explosions rumble above them like distant thunder. Another convoy destroyed. Another artery cut. And somewhere in Tokyo, naval planners still believe submarines are a secondary weapon. They still believe battleships decide wars. They still believe the Empire's shipping lanes are safe. But beneath the Pacific Ocean, American submarines are beginning a campaign that will slowly suffocate an entire empire. And by the time Japan realizes the truth, it will already be far too late. Because the disaster in the South China Sea is not the beginning. It is the middle of a catastrophe Japan never saw coming. To understand how the empire reached this point, you have to go back to a room in Tokyo. Back to a time when Japanese admirals were laughing. Tokyo, Imperial Japanese Navy headquarters. Spring 1936. The room smells faintly of ink, tobacco, and polished wood. Tall windows overlook the gray waters of Tokyo Bay, where warships sit at anchor like steel monuments to imperial power. Around a long table, Japan's most powerful naval officers study a map of the Pacific Ocean. Red lines mark shipping routes. Blue markers represent fleets. At the head of the table sits Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, one of the few officers in the room who has actually lived in the United States. He knows its industry, its shipyards, its terrifying potential. But most of the men around the table see the world very differently. For decades, the Imperial Japanese Navy has built its strategy around one idea: the decisive battle doctrine. In Japanese, it's called kantai kessen. The concept is simple. If war comes with the United States, the massive American fleet will steam across the Pacific to relieve its bases in the Philippines. Along the way, Japanese submarines and aircraft will slowly weaken the approaching force. Then, near Japan's home waters, the Imperial Navy will deliver a single, crushing battleship engagement. A titanic clash of steel giants. Victory in that one battle will decide the war. This belief has shaped everything. Japan builds the largest battleships ever constructed. Ships like Yamato and Musashi, armed with enormous 18.1-inch guns capable of firing shells the size of small cars. Officers train endlessly for gunnery duels at sea. Fleet commanders dream of the moment when their battle line will meet America's across the horizon. In this world, submarines are useful, but not decisive. They are scouts, harassers, tools to soften the enemy before the great battle arrives. No one in the room imagines submarines could win a war on their own. An officer points to a map. American industrial power is enormous, he says carefully. If we allow their merchant fleet to move freely across the Pacific, they can supply their forces indefinitely. A few heads nod, but another admiral waves the concern away. Merchant ships are not the decisive target. He taps the map. Warships are. To him, the war will be decided by steel giants exchanging gunfire across the ocean. Destroy the American fleet, and their merchant ships will become irrelevant. Someone mentions the growing power of submarines in European navies. Germany's U-boats are already proving dangerous in the Atlantic. The idea draws polite smiles around the table. Japan already has submarines, some of the largest in the world. But their mission is different. They are not meant to hunt cargo ships. They are meant to hunt warships, aircraft carriers, battleships, cruisers, targets worthy of naval glory. Merchant ships? Those are secondary, unimportant. Admiral Yamamoto watches the conversation unfold in silence. He understands something many others in the room do not. War between Japan and the United States will not be decided by a single battle. It will be decided by production, factories, shipyards, oil, and ships. Thousands of ships, cargo ships moving across the Pacific like veins carrying lifeblood through an empire. But the culture of the Imperial Navy is powerful. For decades, officers have risen through the ranks dreaming of decisive fleet battles. Submarine warfare against merchant shipping feels dishonorable, too indirect, too much like the tactics of desperate nations. Japan sees itself differently, a warrior navy, not pirates hunting cargo vessels. So the doctrine remains unchanged. Submarines will stalk American warships. Battleships will decide the war. And the merchant fleet barely enters the conversation. Far away, across the Pacific Ocean, American naval officers are studying the same problem. They are reaching a very different conclusion. Because the United States Navy understands something simple. In modern war, armies do not move without ships. Factories do not run without oil. And empires cannot survive without merchant fleets. When war finally comes in 1941, both sides will unleash their submarines. But they will hunt very different prey. Japan will chase the American fleet. America will hunt Japan's lifeline. And, at first, no one in Tokyo will notice the difference. December 8, 1941. Pacific Ocean. Just hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Across the vast Pacific, dozens of American submarines are already slipping away from their bases. Some depart from Pearl Harbor, still surrounded by burning ships. Others leave the Philippines, Guam, and the Dutch East Indies. Inside the steel hull of the submarine USS Wahoo, diesel engines rumble as the boat heads into open ocean. Commander Dudley Mush Morton studies a chart table lit by a dim red lamp. The news from Hawaii has already spread through the fleet. War has begun. The United States Navy has only one immediate weapon capable of striking back across the Pacific: submarines. At the start of the war, America possesses about 50 operational fleet submarines in the Pacific. Long, sleek boats designed to travel thousands of miles and remain at sea for weeks. Each carries a deadly cargo: 24 torpedoes. Morton taps the map. Japan's empire stretches across half the Pacific, he says quietly. His executive officer nods. The Japanese have conquered enormous territory almost overnight: Malaya, the Philippines, Hong Kong, the Dutch East Indies. These lands are rich in resources: oil, rubber, tin, everything Japan needs to keep its war machine running. But there is a problem. Japan itself has almost no natural resources. The empire depends entirely on cargo ships to move oil and raw materials from Southeast Asia back to the home islands. If those ships stop moving, the factories stop. The Navy stops. The war stops. American submarine commanders understand this immediately. But there is a frustrating obstacle: the torpedoes. The U.S. Navy's standard weapon, the Mark 14 torpedo, is supposed to be devastating. It carries a powerful warhead and an advanced magnetic detonator designed to explode beneath a ship's keel. On paper, it's perfect. In reality, it barely works. Early patrols in 1942 are filled with disbelief. Submarines line up perfect attacks on Japanese ships. Torpedoes streak through the water. And then, nothing. No explosion. Sometimes the torpedoes run too deep, sliding harmlessly beneath their targets. Other times the magnetic detonator triggers too early, exploding before reaching the ship. And sometimes the torpedo simply strikes the hull and fails to explode at all. Inside submarines across the Pacific, captains stare through periscopes in disbelief as enemy ships sail away untouched. Commander Charles Lockwood, a senior submarine officer, receives report after report describing the same problem: perfect shots, zero results. At first, the Navy refuses to believe the torpedoes are faulty. Commanders are quietly blamed for poor firing solutions. But the evidence keeps growing. Submarines are risking their lives and achieving almost nothing. Meanwhile, Japanese merchant shipping continues to move freely across the Pacific. Tankers carry oil from Borneo. Cargo ships haul rubber and food from Malaya and Indochina. Convoys move day and night. And in Tokyo, naval leaders remain focused on the decisive battle they believe is coming. Submarines are already hunting American warships. Japanese submarine commanders stalk aircraft carriers and cruisers across the Pacific. They achieve some dramatic successes. In September 1942, a Japanese submarine sinks the aircraft carrier USS Wasp. Another torpedoes the battleship USS North Carolina. These victories reinforce the Navy's doctrine. Submarines are doing exactly what they were designed to do: hunting warships. But something else is happening far below the surface of the war. American submarines are learning. Their captains are growing more aggressive. Men like Dudley Morton, Richard O'Kane, and Eugene Fluckey begin experimenting with bold new tactics: night surface attacks, aggressive convoy infiltration, relentless pursuit of merchant shipping. Even with faulty torpedoes, they begin to score occasional successes. A cargo ship here, a tanker there. At first, the losses seem minor. Japan's merchant fleet is enormous, more than 6 million tons of shipping at the start of the war. A few ships disappearing each month does not alarm Tokyo. But beneath the ocean, a quiet shift is underway. American submarine crews are gaining experience. Their tactics are improving, And eventually, the torpedo problem will finally be solved. When that happens, the war beneath the Pacific will change overnight. Because once the torpedoes start working, Japan's merchant fleet will begin to vanish. June 24, 1943. Midway Island Submarine Base. The sun is already brutal by mid-morning. Mechanics sweat over steel torpedoes laid out along the pier, their dull metal bodies reflecting the harsh Pacific light. For nearly 2 years, American submariners have been fighting the war with weapons they no longer trust. Perfect shots, perfect positioning, and torpedoes that simply refuse to explode. Now, the patience is gone. Inside a small briefing room overlooking the harbor, Rear Admiral Charles A. Lockwood, commander of U.S. submarines in the Pacific, stands in front of a group of frustrated submarine captains. On the table beside him sits a damaged torpedo recovered from the sea. Lockwood taps the metal casing. "This," he says flatly, "is why we've been missing." The room is silent. For months, submarine captains had insisted something was wrong with the Mark 14 torpedo and its Mark 6 magnetic detonator. But Navy ordnance officials in Washington had refused to believe it. The weapons had passed all their tests. On paper, they were flawless. But war is not fought on paper. Lockwood finally decided to prove it himself. He ordered a series of tests near Hawaii. Submarines fired torpedoes at captured nets and cliffs under controlled conditions. The results were embarrassing. The torpedoes consistently ran 10 feet deeper than their settings. Magnetic detonators exploded too early. And the contact pistols, the mechanism that should trigger the explosion on impact, often collapsed without firing. Submarine captains had been risking their lives with defective weapons. Lockwood didn't wait for permission from Washington. He issued a blunt order across the Pacific submarine fleet. Disable the magnetic detonators. Adjust depth settings. Modify the firing pins. From that moment forward, American submarines would use their torpedoes the old-fashioned way, by slamming them directly into the hulls of enemy ships. Simple, reliable, deadly. The change spreads through the fleet within weeks. And almost immediately, the ocean begins to change. August 1943, Southwest Pacific. The submarine USS Tang, commanded by Richard Dick O'Kane, slides through the dark water on the surface. O'Kane studies a distant silhouette through his binoculars. A cargo ship. He orders the submarine to attack. 4 torpedoes fire. This time, the crew doesn't hold their breath. They already know what's coming. 30 seconds later, a violent explosion tears through the merchant ship's hull. Flames shoot into the sky. The torpedo worked. Across the Pacific, submarine crews begin reporting the same thing. Explosions. Broken hulls. Ships sinking quickly into the sea. Convoys that once felt untouchable suddenly become easy prey. Submarine captains grow bolder. They begin attacking on the surface at night, racing straight into Japanese convoys like wolves among sheep. The long, low silhouette of an American submarine is hard to spot in darkness. Japanese escorts struggle to react quickly enough. Torpedoes slam into tankers carrying precious oil. Cargo ships loaded with steel, coal, and food vanish beneath the waves. One by one, the arteries of the Japanese empire begin to bleed. At first, Tokyo barely notices. The losses are scattered across thousands of miles of ocean. Reports arrive slowly. A tanker missing near Borneo. A cargo ship sunk near the Philippines. Another convoy attacked near Formosa. Individually, they seem insignificant. But together, they form a pattern that will soon become impossible to ignore. Because by 1944, American submarines are no longer hunting alone. They are beginning to operate in coordinated groups. Entire wolf packs of submarines sweeping through shipping lanes. The Pacific Ocean is turning into a graveyard for Japanese cargo ships. And somewhere in Tokyo, naval planners are about to realize something terrifying. Their decisive fleet battle has not yet happened, but they are already losing the war. March 3, 1944. East China Sea. Dawn. A pale gray light creeps over the water as a Japanese convoy pushes north toward the home islands. 6 cargo ships, 2 tankers, 3 destroyer escorts weaving back and forth across the formation. The sea looks calm, peaceful even. Thin mist hangs low over the waves. On the bridge of the tanker Nippon Maru, sailors sip tea and watch the horizon brighten. For months, rumors have circulated through the merchant fleet. Ships disappearing, convoys attacked in the night, submarines lurking along the trade routes. But the officers aboard this convoy believe their escorts will keep them safe. Destroyers are scanning the water with sonar. Lookouts sweep the sea with binoculars. The convoy continues forward, slow, heavy, full of cargo that Japan desperately needs. Oil from the Dutch East Indies, iron ore from Malaya, food supplies for the growing shortages back home. Without ships like these, Japan cannot fuel its navy. It cannot run its factories. It cannot feed its cities. Beneath the surface of the sea, something waits. 2 American submarines glide silently through the dark water. USS Tang, USS Steelhead. They have been tracking the convoy all night. Inside Tang, Commander Richard O'Kane peers through the periscope. 6 cargo ships, 2 tankers. Perfect targets. The convoy moves slowly, its engines vibrating through the ocean like distant drums. O'Kane lowers the periscope and speaks quietly. Set up a spread. We're going to hit the center of the convoy. Torpedo men move quickly. Steel doors swing open. Compressed air hisses. The submarine drifts closer. Closer. On the surface above, the Japanese destroyers continue their patrol patterns. But the ocean is vast, and submarines are patient. O'Kane raises the periscope again. The nearest tanker fills the lens. Fire 1. The submarine shudders. Fire 2, 3, 4. 4 torpedoes streak away. O'Kane keeps watching through the scope. 30 seconds. Then, the tanker explodes. A violent column of flame erupts into the sky as thousands of gallons of fuel ignite instantly. The convoy breaks apart in panic. Sirens howl. Destroyers accelerate, racing toward the explosion. But another detonation rocks the water. 1 cargo ship tears open amidships. Another begins listing sharply to port. Crewmen leap into the sea as flames spread across the deck. Beneath the waves, USS Steelhead launches its own attack. More torpedoes. More explosions. Within minutes, 3 ships are sinking. The remaining vessels scatter in every direction. Japanese destroyers drop depth charges wildly, trying to find the invisible attackers. But the submarines are already slipping away into the deep water. Above them, burning ships illuminate the dawn like floating bonfires. Scenes like this are now happening across the Pacific. Day after day, night after night, American submarines are hunting along every major shipping route. The South China Sea, the Philippine Sea, the narrow straits between Formosa and Japan. Cargo ships that once sailed freely now vanish without warning. Tankers disappear before delivering their oil. Entire convoys fail to arrive at their destinations. At first, Japanese naval leaders assume the losses are temporary. Convoys are reorganized. More escorts are assigned. But the numbers keep growing. By late 1944, the statistics are staggering. American submarines have sunk hundreds of Japanese merchant ships. Entire shipping lanes are collapsing. Fuel deliveries drop sharply. Factories slow down. Ships remain in port because there is no oil to power them. Japan is beginning to choke. And suddenly, the Imperial Navy realizes something horrifying. Their submarines have been hunting the wrong targets all along. While they chased American warships, American submarines have been strangling the empire itself. The realization comes slowly, then all at once, because by 1945, the ocean around Japan will look very different. not crowded with merchant ships, but eerily empty. January 12, 1945. Tokyo Harbor. Early morning. A freezing wind sweeps across the gray water as a single cargo ship limps into port. Its paint is scorched. One lifeboat is missing. The hull carries fresh scars where steel has been hastily welded over damage from an explosion. Dockworkers watch in silence. A year earlier, ships arrived here constantly. Tankers from Borneo, cargo vessels from Singapore, convoys packed with raw materials from across the empire. Now the harbor feels strangely empty. Only a handful of ships remain tied to the docks. Inside government offices overlooking the port, Japanese officials study shipping reports that grow more alarming with every passing week. The numbers are undeniable. At the start of the war, Japan possessed over 6 million tons of merchant shipping. It seemed more than enough to supply the empire. But American submarines have been hunting those ships relentlessly for 3 years. Every month, more disappear. Some vanish without a trace. Others send desperate radio messages before explosions cut them off mid-sentence. Entire convoys fail to arrive. By 1945, nearly 5 million tons of Japanese shipping has been destroyed, most of it by submarines. The consequences spread through the empire like a slow poison. Oil from the Dutch East Indies barely reaches Japan anymore. Without fuel, the Imperial Navy's mighty battleships sit motionless in harbor. The giant Yamato, once the pride of the fleet, spends months tied to its dock because there is simply not enough oil to send her to sea. Aircraft training programs collapse. Pilots cannot practice flying without fuel. Factories struggle to produce weapons because steel and rubber shipments are constantly interrupted. Even food becomes scarce. Rice shipments from Southeast Asia fail to arrive. Cities begin rationing meals. In Tokyo, long lines form outside food distribution centers. Civilians whisper about shortages. Children grow thinner, and still the ships keep sinking. In the East China Sea, American submarines now patrol almost freely. Commander Eugene Fluckey, captain of the submarine USS Barb, studies a chart one night in January. The waters around Japan used to be crowded with merchant traffic. Now the map looks almost empty. Fluckey turns to his crew. "We're running out of targets." It sounds like a joke, but it isn't. American submarines have destroyed so many ships that Japan is struggling to replace them. Shipyards cannot keep up. Fuel shortages slow construction, and new ships rarely survive their first voyages. Many are sunk before reaching their destination. The empire that once stretched across thousands of miles of ocean is now being strangled by the very waters that once protected it. In Tokyo, naval planners finally understand the scale of the disaster. The decisive fleet battle they spent decades preparing for never truly came. Instead, the war has been decided quietly, invisibly, beneath the surface of the Pacific. By submarines, by torpedoes, by the slow destruction of the empire's lifeline. And by the time Japan realizes this truth, the merchant fleet that once fed the nation is already gone. Across the Pacific, American submarine crews return to base after long patrols. They step onto the docks thinner, exhausted, and often silent. But their impact on the war is enormous. Though they make up less than 2% of the U.S. Navy, American submariners have sunk more than half of Japan's entire merchant fleet. An empire built on ocean trade has been slowly suffocated, not by massive battleships, not by decisive naval duels, but by small, silent boats moving through the dark. The admirals who once laughed at submarine warfare now face a grim reality. The ocean around Japan has become a graveyard of rusting hulls. And without those ships, the empire has no future. Yen